On October 20th, 1973, NBC had to cancel the airing of The Tonight Show, but they had quite a good reason.
The Tonight Show will not be seen tonight, so that we may bring you the following NBC News special report.
I read in one of the newspapers this morning the headline, Cox Defiant. I do want to say that I don't feel defiant.
Good evening. The country tonight is in the midst of what may be the most serious constitutional crisis in its history. The president has fired the man you just saw, the special Watergate prosecutor, Archibald Cox. Because of the president's action, the attorney general has resigned. Elliot Richardson, who was appointed attorney general only last May in the midst of the Watergate scandal, saying he cannot carry out Mr. Nixon's instructions. Richardson's deputy, William Ruckelshaus, has been fired. Ruckelshaus refused, in a moment of constitutional drama, to obey a presidential order to fire the special Watergate prosecutor. In my career as a correspondent, I never thought I'd be announcing these things.
I never thought I'd be announcing these things. That was John Chancellor in 1973, the night Richard Nixon fired the man in charge of the Watergate investigation, Archibald Cox. This was the front page of the New York Times the next day. Nixon discharges Cox for defiance, abolishes Watergate task force. But here's the thing about Nixon carrying out the firing of Archibald Cox. It turns out his task force didn't stop investigating Watergate. It actually kept going, even after Cox was let go. The night of the Saturday night massacre, the special prosecutor's team trekked down to the office to make sure all their documents and evidence were secure. The FBI sealed up the space to make sure nothing was tampered with. And then the investigation just kept going. Soon, the investigation also got a new boss. His name was Leon Jaworski. He did not want the job, and before he agreed to take it, he made sure that what happened to Archibald Cox would not happen to him.
Jaworski accepted the prosecutor's job reluctantly, and only after the White House assured him he'd have complete freedom in running the Watergate investigation. He told newsmen he's confident he won't suffer the same fate as his predecessor, Archibald Cox.
I'm not anticipating that a disagreement will be reached. But on the other hand, one of the matters that I searched for and wanted was complete independence in this undertaking.
All right, put a pin in complete independence. That was Leon Jaworski's condition for taking the job as the new Watergate special prosecutor. And once he got it, Leon Jaworski got to work. He inherited the whole Watergate team and all the evidence they had put together. And after looking at all that evidence stacked up against the president, Leon Jaworski started asking some questions, like, can you actually indict a sitting president of the United States? On February 12, 1974, Leon Jaworski got some advice on that question in a memo from his staff. They told him, yes, you could in fact indict the president while he was still president. Quote, if the president were placed so much apart from all other citizens that he could escape the determination of whether there is probable cause to believe he has committed a crime, one can only imagine how much greater the public cynicism would be. For us, or the grand jury, to shirk from an appropriate expression of our honest assessment of the evidence of the president's guilt would not only be a departure from our responsibilities, but a dangerous precedent damaging to the rule of law. Ultimately, Richard Nixon was not indicted. Instead, prosecutors opted to let the impeachment proceedings in Congress run their course, which of course led to Nixon's resignation and eventual pardon by President Gerald Ford for any and all crimes he might have committed. But it's an interesting question, one that's all the more relevant now that the obstruction of justice inquiry into the current president is reaching a critical mass. We've had presidential impeachments and pardons, but never in the history of this country has a sitting president of the United States been criminally indicted. So, can a sitting president be charged with a crime? And if so, what would that look like? Joining us now is Nick Ackerman. He was a former assistant special Watergate prosecutor under Archibald Cox and Leon Jaworski.
Right.
Nick Ackerman, so you worked for both of them. So
yes.
You just kept on working.
We just kept going. In fact, the next day after the Saturday night massacre, just to let people in the White House know we were still open for business, I was making calls and keeping appointments, and we all did that.
You were telling me that you were in the front row of that that announcement.
In fact, there's also, I think, the group of the staff, you saw me coming out, I looked a lot different. I had a lot more hair. And was
you were
a
there.
lot younger.
So, all right, so let's revisit this question. So apparently in the case of Watergate, it never got to that, but the determination was that Nixon could, in theory, have been indicted for crimes. Fast forward to 1998 and the impeachments against Bill Clinton, or the impeachment of Bill Clinton. Ken Starr writes a memo on May 13, 1998, in which he said it is proper, constitutional, and legal for a federal grand jury to indict a sitting president for serious criminal acts that are not part of and are contrary to the president's official duties. In this country, no one, even President Clinton, is above the law. So do you concur with those findings?
I think that's right, but you've got a Justice Department regulation that wouldn't permit the prosecutors to do that. But
what is that regulation?
Well, it's a regulation within the department. I mean, it's a department practice that they are not going to indict a sitting president.
So a grand jury could indict the president, but the Justice Department would not go forward with it.
Except the Justice Department recommends indictment. So it's not like the grand jury is going to do it on their own.
Right.
But if they did, I mean, then you would have an argument in court by the president saying he's a sitting president. His time would be taken up to a great extent, having to sit through pretrial proceedings, having to sit through a criminal trial, and that it should wait until he finishes his term of office or is impeached. I mean, that's kind of the practical issue. But the legal issue is really not decided. I mean, the bottom line legal issue is the president is not above the law. He is not King George. In 1776, we made a determination that we were going to be run by a constitution and by laws. We did something pretty radical at that point. We got rid of the king. And so we have checks and balances. And the president has to provide evidence, as he's going to be required to do.
Well, let me stop you right there, because I think one of the things that people have been concerned about is Donald Trump is a norm breaker. He doesn't agree that he has to abide by a lot of these rules and these norms. What if, let's say, a subpoena is issued to President Donald J. Trump, that he has to produce evidence and information for the special prosecutor, and he simply says no?
Then the prosecutor will go into court. And he'll be directed to produce it. I'm sure if this goes to the Supreme Court under U.S. v. Nixon, he's not going to have any choice but to provide evidence.
Could Donald Trump evade all of this by pardoning himself?
I don't think that would work. In fact, I don't think the pardon power extends to the point where if you have a conflict of interest, whether you pardon your relatives, your son-in-law, your daughter, whoever it is, and yourself, I just don't think any court would say that the pardon power is included. There is such a body of law that has grown up over the years about conflict of interest that I just don't think the Supreme Court wouldn't apply that to a case where someone was so blatantly misusing the pardon power.
Wait, are you saying that Donald Trump could be prevented by a court from pardoning Jared Kushner or his son?
Sure. I mean, under Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, the president has to abide by and execute faithfully the laws of the United States. That doesn't mean he can go out there and use them for his own purposes to evade the law and to put himself above the law. And I think there'd be a pretty strong argument that any such pardon would not be enforceable. We've never had this happen before.
Yeah, and we've also never tested whether or not all of that would hold up in front of a Supreme Court in which Donald Trump named the person who gives Republicans a 5-4 majority. So that's another thing, too.
Yeah, but don't forget this.